So I love playing puzzle games. They're fun to play with my partner, my friends, and my family. And they also help me to challenge my brain a bit. So in this course, I will be teaching you how to make a grid-based puzzle game called Sokoban, and I will be teaching you everything you need to know about making games with Godot, ranging from absolute beginner stuff to concepts like how to make your menus and your settings, to saving your players' data as they progress through the game, and multiplayer. But in the future, because why should we not have a multiplayer Sokoban game which you can play with other people? So I will be teaching you all of those stuff and more, but not in this specific video. I will be creating other videos for this course's playlist. So subscribe to get notified for when I release the other parts of this course. So with that, we can get to the course. But before we do, actually I can just show you a sample of what we are going to be making. So this is basically Godot, but I can just press this button over here to test my project. And you can see we are going to make a sort of a menu, which we can go to the settings, maybe like edit, change the volume of the game. Then we can press the start button to take us to a level picker scene, where we can select the first level. Then you can see if we can push around our boxes and move our players. We can hit walls, and if we make a mistake, like pushing this box to the edge of the window so we can't be able to take it to the storage, we can just press this button over here to pause the game and continue, or we can press pause and retire the game. Then if we push the box to the storage site, you can see that the score over here changes, and if we push all of the boxes in the storage sites, you can see that we get our final score and we win the game. So we can just press next level to go to the next game, and we are going to be solving basically puzzles like this. So this game can get quite challenging depending on how the different walls have been set up and where the storage sites are. So yeah, this is the basic game we'll be creating. So you can just quit, go back, and then close the game. So of course we'll be polishing it up as we go on, but that's the basic structure of the game we're going to be making. So now we can get to the course officially. So the first thing you're going to want to do for this course is to, of course, go to godotengine.org and download the latest version of Godot over here. So I will leave the link to this in the description. Then once you've downloaded it, you can unzip the folder that the application is in. Then you can run it, and once you run it, you're going to be met with this window, and this is the project manager window, and it's basically where if you've ever created another file or another project, it's going to be shown over here, and you can press this button to edit it. And you can also download some assets for your game and use them in your own projects. Also, you can create new projects, and that's what we are going to be doing in this tutorial. So I'll just press this button to create a new project, and then I'll set its project name to Sokoban because that's the game we're creating. Then I'll just change this to compatibility. These are different render modes, and we don't really need advanced 3D graphics, or we don't really need this to be specifically for mobile. We're just going to set it to compatibility because this will work for most projects. So I'll just go over here to project path, and then I am going to look for the folder which I want to store my project. So for me it will be in courses, Godot, then new folder, and then I'll just call this project. But you can use any folder you'd like where you want to store your project in. So I'm just going to press select current folder, and if we go to that folder through our file manager for our device, so mine's in desktop, courses, Godot, project, you can see that for now it's currently empty, but when we press create and edit, you can see that Godot will create a folder for our game. And this is where you will be storing all of your game's assets, all of the images and the audio for everything you will be using in your game. So now you have created your first project in Godot. Congratulations. But now what do we do over here? So I will explain to you what these different sections in the screen are first of all, and then we can get to actually making our game. So this first place over here is called the file system, and it's basically a representation of this folder. You can see we have our icon.svg over here, and we also have it in over here. So this icon file is created automatically by Godot in every folder, and it's a nice way to basically say that this is a Godot project. So anything you create, any folder you create over here will also be created over here. And there are also some hidden files, and we will not be using those ones. That's why they are hidden. So this is the file system. The second part we're going to be talking about is this buttons over here. So when you open up a new Godot project, it's going to take you automatically to the 3D view. And you can navigate this 3D view by using the mouse wheel. So if you scroll up, you're going to zoom in, and if you scroll down, you're going to zoom outwards. And if you click the middle mouse button and drag around the screen, you're going to basically rotate around the view. You can also use this gizmo over here at the top right of the screen to rotate around your view. So we are going to be making a 2D game, so we are just going to press this button to switch into the 2D view. And over here in the 2D view, you can see that we have our two axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. And then this is the origin of our screen. So you can see that where these two axes meet, this will be the top left of the game window. And then this blue line over here represents the game window. So anything you're going to be putting in this blue rectangle will be seen in the scene or in the game window. So these are the functions of these two buttons. Also, if you're coding, you're going to be using this script mode, and that's basically all you need. Also, if you want to download assets, of course, you can also download them through here. So that's for this. Then over here to the top left, we have some buttons. The first one can help you to save your scenes and to open new files. The second one holds your project settings, and if you want to export this game to probably like Windows or Mac, iOS, Android, etc., you're going to use these buttons over here. If you want to change your project settings, you will press this button over here. If you want to go back to the project manager in order to start editing or to create a new project, you'll press this button. This one has useful buttons for debugging. This one has other buttons, but we will not be using some of these a lot. These ones are the most important for now. And then, yeah, that's basically it. So finally, we have these two sections and this one over here. So this one is the section which you're going to be using to test your game. So when you press these buttons, it's going to run your game to test it. So this one runs the current scene, and this one runs the whole game project. So I'll be explaining what a scene is right now. So when you press this button, it's going to run a scene. You can see that this place over here is written as scene. And what a scene is in Godot, it's basically a group of nodes. And nodes in Godot are the building block of everything. So if you want to create a player character, for example, you're going to use nodes. If you want to add in audio to your game, you're going to use an audio node. And yeah, basically, if you want to add in an image to your game also, or a button, you're going to add in a node. So we are going to create our first node and our first scene so that you can see what I mean by nodes. So we are just going to come over here to the scene section. This scene section is where you will be adding your nodes, and this inspector section is where you will be editing the various properties of your selected node. So these are the two places you're going to be working most in Godot. So let us create our first scene, the player scene. So we're just going to come over here and press this plus icon, or you can press this other node icon button over here, and it will just take you to the same place. So you can just scroll to look for the node you want, but the easier method is to just search for it over here and write the first few characters of your node. So for example, character body 2D, and then when you press enter, or you click it, it's going to add in that node. So the character body 2D node is the node with the object with some physics properties which will enable us to be able to move our player around. So once you have that character body 2D, you're going to see that we don't really see anything on the screen besides this point, and this is where our character is. But in order for us to see our character, we are going to have to add in another node in this node to give it a property for sights or for having images so that we can be able to see it. So we are just going to press the plus icon again, and then we are going to add in a sprite 2D node. And a sprite 2D node is basically a node which holds an image. Basically every image in a game, in a 2D game, is a sprite. And yeah, so this is the object for holding 2D images. So one thing you're going to notice is that the image also is blank. So we're going to have to drag in our image for our player into this texture property. So you're going to download the assets I have in the description. For me, I have them over here in my desktop in the assets folder. Then I can just drag them into Godot and then drop them here in the file system, and Godot will automatically add them to my game so I can be able to use them. So if I go back over here to my project folder, you can see that I created the same folder. So I can just close this window, and now we have our assets in our game. So you just download the assets, unzip them, and then drag them into your project, into the file system. And now we can come over here to graphics in our assets folder, then drag in our spritesheet.png to this texture property over here. And now you can see we have added an image to our player node. One more thing we can do for this character body 2D, we can rename it to player by double clicking it or right clicking on it and then writing rename. So we can just rename this to player, and then we can press Ctrl S to save, or Command S, or you can come over here to scene, then go to save scene. Then you can look for the folder which you want to save your player scene in. That is of course in your project directory. So you're just going to right click, press create new folder. We're going to call this folder scenes, and it will hold in all of our scenes. Then we can create another folder in that folder called characters, and then we can save our player.tscn in this one, or we can just call this characters. Then I think I want to rename this folder to entities. So I'll just come over here to assets, then not to assets, to my scenes folder. You can see that it was created. Then I'll rename this to entities so that we can have like our boxes also into this folder. So I can just save my scene again, and then I'll save it into the entities folder. Then I'll save it into the characters folder in the entities folder. So now we have our first scene. So a scene is basically a group of nodes. So if you have nodes, yeah, that's basically a scene. So now we can look over here into our folder, and you can see that we have our player.tscn file, and that is basically the scene for your player. So now you can see that our player has 4 images. This is called a sprite sheet, and it's basically an easy way of managing all of the frames of your player sprite. Instead of having like individual images for all of these directions, you can have them in one image, and then you can separate them in the Godot editor by clicking this sprite 2D node. You can see every time I click on a different node, the properties over here change to reflect the properties of this node. So I just click the sprite 2D node and I can see its properties. Then I'll just come over here to animation and change the horizontal frames to 4, because we don't have any vertical frames. Vertical frames would have been if we had like another frame under here, but because all of our frames are horizontal, we'll just change this to 1, 2, 3, 4, because we had 4 frames. And now if you change the frame property of the image, you can see that our player basically looks at a different direction. So that is the function of this frames property over here. So now our player can look into various directions. Then one final thing for our player is you'll see there is a warning over here, and this warning is this node has no shape, so it can't interact with other objects. Consider adding a collision shape so that it can have a shape. So basically what this means is our player is just currently an image. It can't really hit anything or interact with anything in the game, anything else in the game. It will just basically be able to move around. So if we want our player to be able to like collide with walls, we are going to add in a shape for it. So we can tell the Godot physics engine that, hey, this object looks like this. So if you hit a wall, you're going to behave in a certain way. So we're just going to add in. So make sure you are clicking the root node. So the first node in any scene is called the root node, and all of the nodes in that node are called children node. So any node can have as many children node as you'd like, and you can add in other nodes into this node specifically, or you can add them to the root node. So we're going to click the root node and press the plus icon in it. Then we're going to look for another node called collision shape 2D, so that we can give our player the properties of being able to collide with other objects. So we'll see this one also has a warning, and this warning basically means we need to give the shape an actual shape. So we'll just come over here to the shape property of this node, and we're going to add in a rectangle shape 2D. Or if you maybe had like a circular like player, you're going to add in a circle node. But for us, we are going to be using a square shape. So new rectangular shape. Then we're just going to change this size to 64 pixels by 64 pixels, because everything in our game is basically 64 pixels long by 64 pixels wide. So that's what we are going to be using. So now we have our player, and it has a shape that it can use to collide with everything else in the game. So we can just press Ctrl S to save our scene. And now we have our first scene in Godot. Congratulations, you have your player scene. So now if you want to test this specific scene for your player, you can press this button over here at the top. And you can see that we have our game window, and we have our player at the very top left of our screen over here. So you remember that I told you that this is the origin of your game window, and then this blue line over here is basically a representation of the game window. So if we drag our player somewhere towards the center of the screen, you will see him move. So one thing you'll notice is that we moved the collision shape, but we didn't move the rest of the player. So the player object, the character body 2D, is left here at the origin, and so is the sprite. We basically move the shape only. So if you want to move the whole of the player at once, just press like Ctrl Z to undo what we just did, and then you can come over here and click the root node, the player node that is. Then you're going to press group select, this button over here. So now everything will be moved or selected when everything will move at once when we basically drag the player across the screen, so that it won't separate into various pieces. So now you can see that our player basically moved to somewhere towards the center of the screen. So now we can just press Ctrl Z to return our player back to the origin, or you can click the player property over here, go over here to transform, and then you can see that the position of the player has changed. And if I drag the player around the screen, you can see its position is changing. So if you want to return any property that you changed back to its default in Godot, you can press this undo icon over here, and it will reset everything. So you can see now that our player went back to the origin of the screen. And now you have your first scene in Godot. We can create another one, and then I'll show you how to build your levels. So we're just going to press this plus icon over here to add a new scene, and we can create a scene for our box. So we're just going to press add other node, and the node we are going to be adding for our box will also be a character body 2D. Then we can just double click it to rename it to box, and then we can just press Ctrl H to save, or click this button over here, then click save scene. Then we can just move up one folder, create another folder in our box, in our entities folder. Then we can just call this boxes. you have to like create folders for everything so that you can be more organized in Godot. For example, if you wanted to create like different player characters, you could just add them into this folder. So once you have your boxes folder, you can just save this into this folder, and then we can get to creating our box. So now you're just going to press that plus icon, then create a sprite 2D node so that you can see the box. Come over here to your assets folder, graphics, then drag in your crate.png to its texture property, and voila, you can see your box. Now you can add in a collision shape so that the box can be able to interact with the rest of the world. So collision shape 2D. Then we are going to add in a new shape, a rectangular shape, and this one will also be 64 pixels by 64 pixels long. So one good rule of they call it a good rule of thumb is that at times you might want your collision shapes to be slightly smaller than the image, but I'll show you why in a later video. But for now we can just leave it to 64 pixels by 64 pixels because that's the entire shape of our screen. We can also create the final scene for our game, which will be the storage sites, and the storage site. Okay, you remember to create a new scene, you press this plus icon. The storage site will be another node, and then we're going to create an area 2D node. And basically what an area 2D node is it's basically like an area where when you enter, some sort of function is triggered. For example, if you had like a coin in your game, it was going to be an area 2D where when you enter that area, it's going to delete the coin and then it's going to add it to your score probably. So in this case, for example, we're going to push our box into the storage and then it's going to trigger a function to add 10 points to our score. So now we have our area 2D. We can't see it, so we're going to add in also a sprite node to our area 2D node. Drag in our storage.png to this texture property over here. And we also have to give this area 2D a shape. So collision shape 2D, so that when we enter this shape, we are going to trigger a function to add our score. So we just add in a new shape, new rectangle shape 2D, and then we're going to add in 64 by 64. We change its size, and now we have our box. We can rename it, our storage site, we can rename this to storage by double clicking again or right clicking, then press Ctrl S to save it. Go up one folder, then create a new folder. We can call this storages. Press OK, and then we can just save this over here. Now we have our 3 scenes, but how do we put this all together in order to create our levels? So there's one good property about, or one easy thing about Godot is that you can basically instance all of this. There's a plane moving at the background. I hope it's not interrupting the audio. So one thing about Godot is you can put scenes into other scenes, and that's basically called scene instancing. And the good thing about that is that when you edit any property of this node, for example, in the scene itself, it will reflect its changes in all of the places where you have used that node. So that's one good feature. Or if you want it to be unique in a certain way, you can also do that. So we have our 3 scenes. So you remember a scene is just a group of nodes, and these nodes you can modify them in any way to make them like this. You can make this your enemy scene. Now we want to put them into a level, so we'll create another new scene, and this scene will just be a node 2D scene. And this node 2D basically means it's basically like if you wanted a 3D scene, you will use the 3D node, or if you want a 2D level, you can use the 2D scene. And because we want a 2D level, we can just press this. Now we have a level node. So the node 2D is basically just a node we can use to put like other 2D nodes together in it. So the 2D nodes, we can rename this to, by double clicking, we can rename this to level. Then we can press Ctrl S to save, go up one folder, go up two folders actually, and then our level is not really an entity in our game, it's another thing. So we'll create another folder called level. Then we can save it in that folder. So if you come over here to your file manager, you can see that in our scenes folder we have two folders, one called entities, the other one called levels. Call that an S. And then yeah, we can start putting stuff into our levels. So we are going to press this other button over here called instantiate child scene. And then if we press that button, we can put in any other scene that we created into our current scene. So we can put in like our box by clicking on it. And now we see we have our box in our level. We can also instantiate a scene into our scene by just dragging it. So if you come over here to where we saved like our player scene, you can just drag it into the scene. Or you can basically use any of those two methods. So we can just drag in our storage site also. And congratulations, you have put in your characters into your level. So now if we run our scene by pressing this button over here, so this button runs the current scene. So now if you see, if we switch to our storage scene and we press this button, it's basically going to run that specific scene. You can see that we only have our storage site. So we will run the level scene again. And now you can see we have all of our objects in one scene, the level scene. So, but now if you press up, down, left, right, or you try to move your player, nothing will happen. And that's because you have to write code into your player scene or into your boxes so that you can actually get stuff to move. But I will be writing script in the next part of the next video of the course. So subscribe to get notified for when I release that one. But we can just close this. So what else we can do in this besides making our player move? Because I don't want this to be too long when I start showing you how to write code. So I'll just show you other stuff and then I'll show you how to script in the separate video. So I'll just delete all of these nodes by just basically pressing delete. I'm not sure what I just pressed right now, or you can just select all of them and then press delete. And then what I can do now is to edit the level and create the tiles so that we can work on it. Or one more thing we can do is something very simple actually. So when you run your scene currently, or when you run your game to test it, you're going to see that the first window that popped up was the boot splash, or the splash screen basically showed us the Godot engine logo. So we can just change that by coming over here to the project settings, then going over here to boot splash and then clicking this image property over here. Then we can look through our folder, in the assets folder, graphics, then we can set it to our bootsplash.png. So for example, if you had like your game logo or your company logo, you could add it to the bootsplash by basically doing like that. It's a very simple process. Now when you run your game to test it, you can see that the first window that pops up will be the logo of your game, or your basically, yeah, it will be the logo of your game or your company. So I can just close the scene. And also you noticed that our level is currently empty, and that's because I deleted everything of the nodes, or everything in the level. That's why it's basically just gray, because we have nothing over here. So now that we have changed the boot splash of our game, we can just press this plus icon over here, and we can add in another node 2D into our level scene. And this one will be for grouping tile sets and tile maps. So we're just going to call this tile map. It will be for grouping all of our tile maps in our game. So what a tile map is in Godot is it's basically an easy way of drawing your levels. And I will show you how to do that in a few. So in our tile map node, you remember I said you can put nodes in other nodes. So we are going to be putting other nodes in this node 2D node, and because we want them grouped together, is because that's why I created a node 2D for grouping them. So I'll just press this plus icon again, then search in for tile map layer, And this will be like basically a layer for our tile map. So I can press Ctrl D to duplicate this layer because I want two layers, one for the floor and the other one for the walls. So once I've pressed Ctrl D to duplicate this layer, I can, or you can right click and then press this duplicate button over here, but I only want two layers, so I can just delete the third one. So now I have my two layers, and you can see over here in our properties, we have a property called tile set. So we're just going to click this drop down and create a new tile set by pressing the first button. Then we're just going to click this tile set, come over here to tile size and change it to 64 by 64. If you look at the level scene right now, you're going to see some grids. And this is basically where we will be painting the tiles for our game. So we can change our tile size to 64 pixels by 64 pixels, and you'll see that our grid has become larger. So I'm using 64 pixels because all of our tiles are 64 pixels. So now in this tile set property over here, you can see that we have various properties like the tile shape. So for example, if you are making like an isometric game, you will just change this to isometric, and you can see that our grid has changed to diagonal lines. And if you are making like a game with like brick layered tiles, you could use this half offsetted square. Or if you are making a hexagonal tile set, you could use the hexagon tile set, and you can basically like change some of these various properties. Like if maybe in the isometric game, you can change some of these properties. And yeah, so that's basically how you change some of this stuff. And then we can just press this button again to revert everything back to the default, because we only have like our square tiles, because our game basically is just square tiles. So we can just click this to close the menu again. And then one thing you're going to notice is that under here in this section over here, two buttons appeared. One is the tile set button, the other one is the tile map button. So this one, we are going to be using it to create the tiles and to edit its various properties. And this one we'll be using to basically paint and draw everything to our level scene. So we are going to come over here to our tile set, drag it all the way up to the top so that it becomes larger so that you can see. Then we're going to come over here to our assets, then drag in the tile.png. And then we just press yes to create our tiles. Drag this so that it becomes a bit lower, and then we can see everything. So now if we go to our tile map button over here, you can see over here we have the tiles properties. And if we come over here to our tile map, we can just select this tile and to begin drawing it. So if you right click or left click, you're going to draw tiles onto your game. And if you right click, you're going to erase those tiles. So because we want to do like a square rectangle to fill our entire game viewport or our entire game window, we can just use the rectangle tool over here and then click the first tile and then just drag our tiles until they like cover somewhere past the game window a bit, so that we can basically have tiles for all, like tiles covering our whole game window. So if I run my scene now, my level scene, you're going to see that I have my tiles and they have covered the entire screen. But one issue you're going to notice is that when we maximize our game window, that the section of the game that's outside the viewport is going to be shown. So this section that we didn't create over here, it's basically going to like extend the viewport of the game. So we want to fix that issue. And how we're going to do that is by coming over here to project settings. Then we're going to click the first button. Then we're going to go over here to our window property. Then we're basically going to stretch the game window instead of like making our game show the part of the screen that we don't really want to see. So we're just going to come over here to the display window property, or you can search for filter settings over here, then search for the window. So once you've come to this place, you're just going to come to this stretch property. Then you're going to set the stretch mode to viewport. So if we were using a game that was not like pixel based, we're going to use canvas items. But For a game with pixel art, you're going to use stretch viewport, and our game basically has like 64 pixels, so I think it can be considered a pixel art game. So we're just going to use stretch by viewport. If you stretch by canvas items, it's for basically games that are not 2D pixel art. So in this place, you can also change like the width and height of your game window. But let me just illustrate one thing, then we can like make our game maximum sized by default. So if I run my scene now and I press the maximize button, you can see that it just stretched our game window and it didn't show the parts of the game that we haven't created yet. So now I can come back over here to my project settings, go over here to the same window property, then I can change my mode from windowed to maximized, so that when we run the game, it starts at maximum size. So now if I run my game, you can see that it doesn't start as a small window. It starts basically when it has filled the whole screen. So now we have our first floor and we can edit our walls. So we're just going to come over here to our second tilemap layer, come over here to the tileset property, click create new tileset, click on the tileset, then we are going to change its tile size to 64 pixels by 64 pixels. Now we can just press Ctrl S to save. Then what we're going to do is basically go over back to the tileset button over here to create our tiles. So we're going to drag in our wall.png. Then we're going to press yes to create our new tileset. Then we're going to go over here to the tilemap button, then click our tile. For we have only one tile for like basically, but in other games you're going to have like bigger tile sets, but for this one we only need this one tile. So I'm just going to click it to draw it. So I'm just going to draw a line, but for drawing lines you're going to want to use the line tool because it's easier to draw lines with this one. So you just click it, then you drag to draw a line. So if you make a mistake on the line, you can just revert it, and then you can just basically create walls all around your scene so that the player won't be able to get out of the game window through any direction. So now we can run your scene, and you can see we have our walls in our game. So some of the walls are outside the viewport, so we can just fix that by clicking our tile set again, going to the tile map, then we can just left click to erase these tiles in a line. Then I can draw in our tiles inside the blue line. So just erase all of this and draw my lines, and now I can see over here in my project that the walls have now been properly placed. Now we basically have our level. In the next video, I might also show you how to create collisions for these walls so that the player will actually be able to hit them, because right now there's no difference between this floor and the walls. The player can't interact with either one of them. But one more thing I can teach you about the tiles is that when you want to like order these tiles, you can drag one above the other. Now you can see that our walls are behind our tiles, our floor, but of course we don't want that, so we can just drag our walls under our tiles. And if you want, you can also rename these tiles to something like floor. Again, double click, you can rename it to floor, and then the other one you can rename to like walls. Now we can just collapse this node because every tile map node was under it, and I can just press Ctrl S to save my current project settings. And now I can teach you one more thing, then I will do the rest of the stuff I wanted to show you in the next video. So we can add in some background music to our game by just clicking the level scene again, click the root node, and then as a child of it, we are going to add in an audio 2D node, or not an audio 2D, an audio stream player node. Then you're going to see it has some properties over here which we can be able to edit. So if you wanted to play a certain track, for example our background music, we can just click this minuet in F major song over here, our background song in our assets. Then we can just drag it to our stream property, and this basically means that the game will play it. But right now, if you run the game, you're not going to hear anything, and that's because the node won't be playing automatically. So if you want it to like play immediately the level starts, you're going to set this autoplay property over here. And now, and also if you want the song to loop after it's ended, you can come over here to parameters, then set looping to on, and then now it is basically a background song. So when it ends, it's going to start again, and when the level starts, it's going to autoplay. So now if we run our scene, there's another aeroplane passing through the background, so you can just ignore the sound. So now if you run your scene, you can hear that you have your background music. So you can just minimize this window and play with some of the properties. You can hear that if we change the volume, the sound becomes louder, and if we change the pitch, the song basically becomes higher pitched and faster. If we decrease the pitch, it becomes lower pitched and slower. So for this game, I saw that a pitch of 0.8 was good for the game because it gives a sort of a puzzle-like feeling. Not too hype, but something that you can play in the background of a puzzle game. And maybe for like when we've won the game, we can maybe change this to something like 2, because when the pitch is high, it sounds like you've basically won the game. So you saw also that when the audio ended, it started looping. So that's how you create your background music in Godot. And now we can just press Ctrl S to save, and then let me just close my game window over here. So finally, I can just like maybe put in all of my boxes back into my game. So I'm just going to create other node 2Ds. So node 2D, then I'll just drag it above the audio stream player so that every other node can be like at the bottom. Then I'm just going to I can just press Ctrl D to duplicate all of these nodes. Ctrl D, or Command D, or right click and then duplicate. And then I'll just call the first node boxes. This one will be for holding all of our boxes in our scene. And then I can call another one storages for holding all of the storage sites. And then this one I can call players. But so maybe when we have like implemented the multiplayer features, we can put all of our players in this folder, but for now we only have one player, so I can just delete this. So now I can go onto this boxes folder over here, and then I can instance a box scene. Then I can drag it maybe somewhere towards the center of the game window, then press Ctrl D to duplicate it. But now you can see that we don't really see the other box. That's because they are on top of each other. So I can just drag the second box away from the first box. Maybe press Ctrl D to duplicate again, then drag this one out of the second box. Then I can instance a storage scene inside my node 2D. So I have to click this storage node and then instance this storages into that node. Then I can drag it somewhere to the center, press Ctrl D to duplicate it, drag this one out, press Ctrl D again, drag it out, and then I can just collapse this. Then I go back to my root node, my level scene, and then I can instance my player. So my player scene, and then just drag it about this audio stream player node. And then I can drag my player into my level scene. Now if I run my scene, my level scene, you can see that we basically have a game, but we can't really move the players or anything. It's like basically like an image, but you have learned something, and I will show you how to create of course everything else at the later sections of this course. But I hope you learned something new, and if you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as I can. But thank you for watching the first part of this course. I hope to see you in the next one, where I teach you how to do other stuff for your game. So with that, Goodbye.